Hello, everyone. This is our first joint live event, and hopefully it's working, and hopefully it's happening, and hopefully it's real, and hopefully you can see two faces who are going to talk about stuff. So I'm Aaron Surma with the Suicide Prevention Coalition. This month is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we are partnering with NAMI Juneau to do mental health awareness stuff. So Crystal, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Crystal Bourland, and I'm the director of NAMI Juneau. We're a mental health education organization here locally, and just excited to be on Facebook Live. I think this is my first time at least doing a conversation, so good to be here and to talk a little bit about language around mental illness and suicide prevention, as well as mental health awareness and starting conversations.
Awesome. And we're doing a video series together for Mental Health Awareness Month, and that's going to come out next week. I think our first video is going to come out. What are we doing with that? What's the story there?
Yeah, so the series is called Mental Health at Home, and we're teaming up with local mental health professionals. So we're really grateful because there's a lot of great providers in Juneau who are willing to share information and tidbits with us on different topics. So we're going to have conversations on telehealth and what that's like. How do you access counseling through telehealth, and just a variety of different topics, how to support someone in your life. We're going to have some suicide prevention information. So these videos will come out twice a week, basically from next week on throughout the rest of May, and then they'll all be available on our YouTube channel at NAMI Juneau. So we're just excited to be able to offer some of this information virtually, especially as a lot of us are at home. We might have more time to tune in, and we also might be experiencing more distress than normal. And so we hope this series will be helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. We've got a couple interviews done already. We have a couple more scheduled. We'll slowly roll them out throughout the week. And it's kind of funny, like NAMI Juneau has Mental Health Awareness Year. I think every month is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so like what we talked about doing today is kind of like maybe like back to basics is one way to think about it. Like, why do we do what we do? And I think like one of the really core things that we do is reduce stigma to enable people to ask for help and to have conversations with loved ones, because either they want help or they want to help somebody that they're worried about. And so we want to talk about the language that we use to reduce stigma. That's just such like a simple core concept. Mm-hmm. And so maybe Mental Health Awareness Month for us is Core Concepts Month, since it's always Mental Health Awareness Month. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, it's a coordinated effort that different organizations throughout the country, and I think probably in different countries at this point as well, really push out information together to try to just talk about mental health. And I think back to basics is a good way to put it, talking about how we support our mental health. And it's also how to have conversations around mental health. And one of my favorite parts of it is it creates this outlet for people to share their mental health stories. So whether that's you having experienced mental distress before and talking about what that looked like, or what's worked for you, or people sharing just recovery stories, or sharing how they're doing now or how they support their mental health. And I really love that part, because to me, those personal stories, at least in the NAMI community, it's a huge way we break down stigma. It's a huge way we connect people to one another. And so it's something that when all these organizations come together, like the National Institute for Mental Health, Child Mind Institute, SAMHSA, NAMI, Mental Health America, to really push out these stories and encourage people to have conversations. It's exciting. So it is mental health all the time at NAMI, but this month especially. And I think it reminds us too that mental health is a continuum, and we might not fall at the same place throughout our lives. We're all vulnerable to mental distress. I think we're seeing that a lot right now during COVID-19. People who are dealing with so many other pressures, financial pressures, children at home. There was a survey here in Alaska. There's a lot of families that are worried about their kids' mental health right now and what's going on with them not being at school and their routines being disrupted and not being able to plan for the future. So when we talk about mental health, it's looking at, I think, strategies that are helpful for all of us, whether you have a mental health condition or not.
Yeah, I agree. And so you put so much thought and effort into this part of the conversation, Crystal. So I really just want you to keep talking here. But like the stigma, the lack of either comfort talking about mental health, mental illness, or not having the right language gets in the way of people asking for help. Is that right?
Yeah, I think not having the language, sometimes it's not having the like awareness or understanding. A lot of mental health and vulnerabilities show up in adolescence, and we might chalk it up to just normal teenage behavior. We might not see symptoms that are there, signs that are there. So I think some of it is just educating ourselves. And all of us are different. So what my distress or vulnerability may be is different from someone else. And so I think, yeah, it's it's the education piece that comes around it as well, but also all of us having some onus of how do I have this conversation? Like if I'm worried about someone, what is a way that I can talk about it? What is a way that I can ask without feeling like I have to have the answers or feeling concerned about what the response might be? And I think the ability just for us to put ourselves out there and have conversations that are frankly uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I think a big thing that we want to repeat as much as possible is like, they are uncomfortable. We're going to talk about preferred ways to have the conversation, but like any method of having a conversation where you say, hey, I'm worried about you, or telling somebody I'm worried about myself, can you help, is a good conversation. Like any genuine attempt to be helpful or ask for help is good.
I think you open yourself up then to just being a safe person to talk to. And like
Mhm.
I really noticed a change when I started working for NAMI. And so people kind of learned about what I was doing in mental health. It really changed the way people talked to me. People would share more than they normally would. I had people, close people in my life who I was already worried about, who then actually started opening up more, just because they knew I was someone who likely could handle those conversations or have those conversations. And so I think just making it known you're willing to go there with people goes a long way, even if they're not ready to have that conversation at that moment or right now. That you're someone who later on they can talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that gets to the point of like encouraging help-seeking behavior. Reducing the stigma encourages help-seeking behavior. So if I say to you, like, hey, Crystal, I'm worried about you, you might not even like, you might say, no, I'm fine, but at least opens the door to you asking me for help at a later date. Like, it
Mhm.
doesn't need to be a one-time conversation. You might not be ready for that conversation right now, but we've hopefully created a pathway where you can ask for help at some point in your life in the future, because I've established like, hey, I'm a nice, helpful person trying to be supportive in some way.
Right. And I think if it's relevant to you to share a time where you've struggled, and maybe it's not, but I think sometimes that opens a door too, if you're willing to say like, hey, I understand if you're going through a hard time, like I've dealt with depression, or I've been in that place before, or I can tell that you're really strained right now and I've been there. Sometimes that relatability is another way, I think, to open a conversation further, or at least put in their minds, like you said, a pathway to have that conversation at another time.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. So can
Yeah.
we
But
talk about the,
yeah.
oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, can we talk about like the specific language to use in having those conversations, and the language that we vote that people use when they're having conversations with other people?
Yeah.
And
I think,
there's a, go ahead.
yeah. I mean, I think one of the things we're going to talk about is that kind of person first language.
Yeah.
And so safe messaging around suicide, but also how do we talk about mental health in a way that is just more acceptable and shows support for people. And it's a big thing, I think, in the disability community to say like person first language. So maybe that's a term people have heard. And to me, what that means is that you're describing what a person has versus what a person is when we're talking about mental illness. So, can I just throw out some examples of what person first looks like?
Hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, well, here's an example. See if you can hear a difference in this. Rachel's a schizophrenic, or schizophrenic Rachel versus Rachel lives with schizophrenia, or Rachel has a diagnosis of schizophrenia. With the latter, we're putting Rachel before her illness and not defining her by it. So to me, that's a real great way people can just learn how to put a person first when they're having conversations or when they're using terms. I think it can be really harmful when we use kind of language that is is defining someone by a condition that they have. Another example is like bipolar Andy or Andy's bipolar. Again, this is implying that the person is their illness, not that the illness is just one component of that person. So like instead you would say Andy has bipolar disorder or Andy lives with bipolar disorder. I also see a lot of judgment in like addiction. And when we talk about substance use, we talk a lot about people being addicts, people being users. I mean, it's like just saying that like addict, user, there's a judgment there. And so when we recognize mental health and substance use as medical conditions, the conditions that they are, we really change our language around that. So another way to say it is let's use Tyler has a substance use disorder, or Tyler's recovering from substance use disorder. It definitely changes the tone and kind of the judgment I think placed on those conditions. So that's an example of person first language. And we all kind of make mistakes or maybe aren't used to using language like that. And I think it's just practicing a little bit and just being more thoughtful about it. We have a lot of harmful stereotypes and misperceptions out there about mental illness. We hear people say crazy, psycho, schizo, nuts, like constantly. And it's our words hold a lot of power. They matter. And they especially matter when someone's struggling with one of those conditions. And to hear that said in a negative connotation, I think it can do a lot of harm. And then to me, stigma just it creates silence. It like breaks that down into where, okay, I feel shame about this. I feel blame about this. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to identify with this. So person first language, I think, is just a nice way to all of us can do to reduce stigma.
And I don't think it's just like a nice thing to do. I think there's a genuine barrier that's put up, like you said. I think another example, like if we want to take it out of the mental health world, like this is a real example. Like I don't know how to fix my car. I am not good at it. If I'm complaining to someone and they say, ask Crystal, Crystal's a car person. That's like Crystal's a different type of person, intimidating. Maybe it's an intimidating type, but maybe it's like not intimidating. Crystal's a car person versus ask Crystal. Crystal knows some things about cars. Like you just sound more approachable in number two. And like the stakes are low when we're talking about a person's knowledge of fixing cars.
Yeah.
But like you said, the stakes are different and more meaningful when we're talking about mental health. Because it's like there's already a societal thing to not talk about these things. So the language that perpetuates that thing, that stigma, gets in the way of people getting help or people talking about what they need.
Yeah, and I think it becomes internalized. I mean, we even see people who've lived with a mental health condition for a long time, and they and their family hearing those negative stereotypes and perceptions really it kind of shuts people down from opening up. And I really think that's a barrier to recovery. I think when you're not talking about what's going on, even if it's with one trusted person versus a small group like a support group or even within your family, you're missing a lot that could be in recovery and I think in healing. And I see that shame and that stigma is internalized for a lot of people. And so on one end, it could stop people from seeking help in the first place. And on the other end, it could keep people from connecting to others because they have this thing in their life that they are feeling shamed about. Mm-hmm. So I think we see it on both ends, and especially harmful in terms of people not seeking help early. And there's this, kind of terrible statistic from the National Institute of Mental Health, and NAMI puts it out there as well, is that the average delay when someone has onset of mental health symptoms to when they actually receive intervention or treatment is 8 to 10 years. That's the average. And we know that about 50% of people, about half who are experiencing depression, anxiety, like symptoms of depression, anxiety, are not seeking any sort of professional help. So we really see, and stigma isn't the only thing that plays out in that, but it is definitely a part of it. We also see discrimination in our mental health system and lack of access to treatment and other things, but definitely that kind of silence around these conversations contributes to those statistics, which are not good statistics.
Yeah, and when I was trying to look through the research of stigmatizing language, there was a great quote, like there's a landmark study in 92, 93. And the quote from the author was, when a tragedy is not spoken of openly, there can be no true sympathy, sharing, or healing. So if you don't feel comfortable talking about your experience, it's impossible to get better. And I
Yeah.
think that like summarizes why we need to talk about this stuff. And
Yeah.
suicide has a lot of other language pieces where I think the subtle differences in how it's stated matters in the exact same
Yep.
way we talked about person first language. Um, the most common phrase in traditionally has been the person committed suicide,
Hmm.
and the term committed puts a moral judgment on it.
Hmm.
So like you're just inherently a bad person if you committed suicide.
Right.
I think been a term that people have used to try to like make it more less judgmental, completed suicide. I also think that one like misses the mark a little bit. I would be pretty mad if someone said that my mom completed diabetes or something like that. Just
Right.
that's not like that's just seems like it misses the mark. So like we recommend saying died of suicide. That person died of suicide. It was a suicide death in the community, as
Right.
opposed to committed suicide. Because again, committed, I hear judgment. I'm less likely to talk about suicide because I don't want to be judged in the same
Right.
way.
Is
Similarly
No, go ahead.
with attempts, there's a term that's used sometimes, failed attempt versus successful attempt. And I think similarly, calling it a success or failure are both just kind of unnecessary. So just calling it a suicide attempt is really, that's the language that we use. And that's the language we recommend other folks use. It was a suicide attempt, as opposed to putting qualifiers that are going to raise emotions, good or bad, with
Right.
successful and failed.
Right. You strongly identify success or failure. I mean, that's like, that means a lot in our society. So to then attach that, I see where that could, yeah,
It's confusing.
it is. Hmm.
And then like some other language I just think people are less aware of. And I wouldn't say there's like bad language out there right now that we're trying to replace or anything. But somebody who has had a suicide attempt, we refer to them as an attempt survivor. So like sometimes we have speaking events, and you put one together a couple months ago where two people said like we are attempt survivors, and they were sharing their stories, and that was helpful for people. And I think that's a term that not everyone has heard before, so I want to make sure folks hear it. Attempt survivor. If someone lost a family member or friend to suicide, suicide loss survivor or loss survivor, those are the common terms. And I think that some folks just aren't aware of that term. And again, like just putting language to this stuff is helpful.
Yep.
There was a story in social work school a long time ago. A little kid said that his stomach hurt. And he was sad, but he didn't know the word sad. So he said his stomach hurts. That's where he felt it. Like if he would have said I'm sad, that would have been, he wouldn't have gone to the doctor for stomach pain a bunch of times. He would have been able to label his emotion. And similarly, like just having these words that talk about things, like being able to say I'm a suicide loss survivor or I'm an attempt survivor, that having that language available to you lets you explore that world and
Hmm.
enables the healing and recovery that we all want to happen.
What would you say in terms of like other safe messaging? So if you're, and I know the coalition does work like in terms of the media, like safe messaging within the media or safe messaging even within the provider community and so forth. And so what about there? What's helpful, or what do you guys share that's helpful to them so that they can be really sensitive when covering these topics, or putting out stories about suicide prevention? What would you say there?
There's a lot to it. I think I think if I was gonna break it down to two things, it would be using the language that you and I are talking about, person first language, saying died of suicide, saying a suicide attempt, using the non-judgmental, non-qualified language, and also making the story like ending it with a positive feeling. So when we talk about suicide, we need to straddle the line between acknowledging that it's a horrible situation for somebody to be in. People do not feel good when they make a suicide attempt. They feel bad, and we need to acknowledge that while also expressing like there is hope and there is recovery from mental illness, and that people do generally feel better after seeking help from others.
Yeah.
So we need to balance acknowledging the very difficult reality of the situation with promoting hope.
Right. And I think we see that a lot of times, through these stories, is people being able to share like, this is where I've been, or this is where I've come from, and this is where I'm at now. And it's not that might be an upward line of recovery. I don't think it always goes in this straight line or upward. Sometimes there's dips in it, but I think really promoting recovery and promoting treatment and different options, that's another thing is what I love about people sharing their stories is you hear a range of stories and impacts to that person's life, but you also hear what treatment worked for them, which is going to look different for every single person, or how they found their way to help, or who's been supportive in their life. And maybe it took a while to find that person. And so you just hear all this nuance that, mental illness doesn't look just one way, and a suicide attempt doesn't look just one way. And yeah, bringing together those stories, I think highlights that and then allows people to connect to what's relevant to them, or what they find in that story that's like, oh, that I get that. Like, I feel less alone because I understand what you're saying right now. I can relate to that.
Totally. And when attempt survivors in particular are sharing their stories, and I say this like partially talking to myself, like I should, like right now I'm saying like I'm talking as a mental health professional, but I do also present where I say like I am an attempt survivor because I am. And I think that it's important to me and to anyone else who is presenting in that capacity to make sure that they're not putting a specific burden on the audience. If I sit there, I need to have an honest conversation. I need to share hope, and I can't make the people in the audience feel responsible for my well-being. Yeah. So if I'm going to get in front of a group of people and say, I'm not feeling well right now, I just put the burden on them to act on it in some way. And that doesn't achieve the overall goal of deepening people's understanding of these nuanced, difficult topics, of reducing stigma, and of sharing how recovery is possible. Because ultimately, like, you want to share recovery stories in the hopes that other people can replicate those stories and like have their own journey. Like, I don't mean replicate like the exact same way, but like find their path as well. And so you don't want to make the audience like just concerned in the moment for your well-being, or that defeats the whole purpose of it.
And and I think that's a great point too, is like not everyone's ready to always share their story. I've definitely seen people where it feels like it's a trigger for them. Like they're not at a place yet where being vulnerable, especially in a group setting, or maybe talking to a group of people. And on the other hand of that, I've seen it be so powerful. The NAMI community is a lot of people coming together to share their stories. And it could be such a powerful advocacy tool and self-advocacy tool. People really getting to share what they've gone through can really help their recovery along, but also with the caveat that not everyone's ready and not everyone's going to share their story publicly. Like that's not it either. So I think it's really person dependent. And I definitely agree and like what you said about not making the audience feel responsible for someone's well-being in that moment.
Yeah, totally. And I think so, like, to summarize all this, we want to acknowledge reality. Like, you don't want to minimize just the reality of mental illness in general, and in particular suicide, but you also want to promote hope. You need to leave people with a good feeling if you want them to change their willingness to talk about this condition. And I think that something in our community that nails that balancing those two things is the signs, the white background, black text, "You matter," that Melissa McCormick and her organization Find Your Fire put out. Like, just 2 words and it totally nails this, right? Like, there's an assumption that like you might not be feeling like you matter. That's why the sign exists, but the sign is telling you you do matter. And that it simultaneously acknowledges that things are difficult and promotes hope. And it's 2 words. And I think that little phrase is genius and perfectly captures what we're talking about.
It is. And I have one out in the NAMI parking lot. And I've actually had someone come. They were from out of town and they were seeing the signs throughout the community and out front, and came in to tell me his story and how meaningful that was. Like, true. I actually went and gave him the sign. I was like, I have one for you, like, take it back where you're going. And it, genuinely meant so much to him to see those at a time when he was going through a difficult time. So the signs are awesome. Way to go, Melissa, too. And I know throughout Mental Health Awareness Month, she's also teaming up with, I think it's Balloons by Nightshades. Is that the right business?
Yes, it is.
But Yep, and they have balloons out like in green. Green is kind of the mental health awareness color, and they have a variety of signs and posted around town. And I think it's like especially nice to see right now because when you're going to places in town, it feels like really empty. Downtown feels super empty. I went downtown last night and it was really hard actually. I mean, just to see businesses closed and no one around. And I just think that signs like that and community and connection like that, just it really goes a long way, and it really goes a long way right now. So
Mhm.
yeah,
I
could we
agree.
could we share a few resources on conversations around mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Okay. So I wanted Megan, who works as the program coordinator at NAMI, I think she tuned me into this website called Seize the Awkward.
Mhm.
And it's really geared towards young adults, but it is bringing in humor and acknowledging that sometimes talking about our mental health or talking to a friend about their mental health can be difficult. But it gives some kind of pointers and videos of how people can go about it. It's acknowledging that there might be awkwardness in it as well. So there's a humor bent. So just know that going into it, it's not like a serious resource, but also it has a lot of different celebrities and people talking about sharing their story. And some of them are talking about ways that it's been helpful for people to open up to them or how they've opened up to others. So I think it's a good site. There's Man Therapy, which is a site really specific to men and opening up about feelings and being able to build in a conversation about mental health while you're also talking about sports or anything else. So that one I think is a great website as well. And then you guys on the coalition page, you also have some pointers for how to talk to someone, especially right when they're concerned about someone's life and they're asking them questions around suicide. And so that might be a great one to share as well for folks who are listening into the conversation.
Great. I'm posting those as we
Oh,
go. So
you
if you
are?
want to talk
Cool.
for one more second, and I'll post the third one.
Yep. And there is another resource on NAMI Juno's page, and I'd have to get you there. I don't know if you can just like click right to it, but it's a crisis guide and it's kind of geared towards family members. And it includes communication tips like how to use reflective communication, how to use I statements, how to open up conversations rather than shut them down. And so that is a mental health crisis guide, like I said, on the NAMI Juno webpage, probably under our resources. So that's another one that might be helpful, especially if you're concerned about someone in your life right now and you're just looking for some helpful language of how to open up a conversation.
Crisis services. All right.
It's probably on the crisis services or resources.
There we go.
Yeah.
Great. We got those shared. Crystal,
Awesome.
we're checking off so many things that we wanted to talk about. This is great. We've gone for 35 minutes. We've already gone longer than we wanted to. Do you want to keep talking? Do you want to save some fodder for a future conversation? How do you feel?
It's up to you. Do you have anything else we are missing or that we want to touch on?
I think like one very last thing that I want to say, just as we were talking about language, one that was brought up to me in a presentation that I did with another person last fall. And then like every time I've repeated it since, it seems to have resonated with folks. And that's the phrase attention seeking behavior. I think that's used a lot of times in a very negative connotation. Like, oh, that person always says that they're unhappy. They're just seeking attention. And like you can just replace that with asking for help, like, and then all of a sudden it's a much more human thing and it's more actionable. Yeah, people post things and they say that they're upset and they're probably being genuine and they probably want help or connection. And so writing it off as attention seeking behavior, I think, minimizes what's going on there and misses a chance to help somebody that is asking for help. And maybe it's not in a direct way. Maybe you just like the way they're asking for help. But like that is an open door to provide support to somebody that you care about.
I think it's also saying that, acknowledging that people are their own experts. Like I'm not an expert in Aaron, and the only way I can truly understand you is by hearing what you're saying and
Mhm.
not then adding a judgment to that.
Mhm.
I think about attention seeking a lot, kind of that negative way to think about it, even in an emergency room setting and in our mental health care system, where if someone comes in with symptoms of like heart attack or, whatever else, they're treated a certain way. They're here, they're in the medical unit, they get help. And when people go in a lot of times for, and this is just hospitals throughout the country, for mental health symptoms, it's like they're questioned so much more about it. Well, do you really need this? Are you at the severity that we need to help you? And I get that emergency rooms are not always the best place for people with mental health, symptoms. But it is a place people can go in crisis. And so I think I've heard really unfortunate stories of people really being questioned, who live with serious mental illness and go into the emergency room and they utilize that for services and feel like they're not being heard or their symptoms aren't being taken seriously. And so I would like to do away with that attention seeking behavior thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I think this has been great. I think we've got a couple of things that we can talk about. We could probably spend another half an hour with them. So let's save the rest of it for another time.
That sounds good. Are you guys going to continue doing these every Friday for a while or?
At least through the month. And I think
Okay.
that was the original plan. And given that we're not going to be back in person seeing folks anytime soon, I think we'll extend it indefinitely beyond May, because this is one of the fewer avenues that we have to get in touch with folks and reach them.
Yep. And you shared the Caroline information out?
So let's make sure we get that out before we wrap this up. The Caroline is an Alaska specific service. It's trained professionals. If you need somebody to talk to, it's not a high bar to entry. They're not going to say, you don't really need this service, don't call us, please. If you need to talk to somebody, they are one option for people to talk with. And their phone number is 877-266-HELP, 877-266-HELP. And there's also a national text line that is available 24/7, same purpose, and that's 741-741. I'm trying to copy and paste the Caroline advertisement while I'm talking here.
And Alaska Caroline, I think it's also for people who are concerned about someone. I've called them kind of with my NAMI hat on, just asking like, okay, well, what if, can a family member call you? Can a friend call you? What if someone's like in a situation where they're really concerned about someone, but they don't know what to do, they don't know what to say? Can you help walk them through that? Can you help kind of be a sounding board? And they say yes. So just an awareness that it's not just for folks who are struggling themselves, but it's also a resource for caregivers, friends who are worried about someone and maybe kind of just needing a little bit of a sounding board in that moment, in that crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, I think that we did a good job here, Crystal, and I really appreciate your help.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to be on Facebook Live. Happy Mental Health Month, everyone. We'll be posting the Mental Health at Home video series with the coalition, I think starting on Monday. So look out for those videos. There'll be everything from 5-minute videos to 20-minute long videos on a whole range of topics. So you'll find something, I'm sure, that's relevant to you.
Awesome.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Chat with you, Aaron.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.